4, 3, 2, 1. Over to you, Charles. Tell us what this is all about.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. A very big welcome to everybody. This is the fourth in our webinar series, 1.5 webinar series about global warming. 2021 is just such a critical year. It's leading up to COP26. It's almost certainly the last year we can limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And yet today, we're on track for over 2 degrees. So today, as Gary says, the discussion is, what world do we want in 2030? So we've heard a lot about what we need to do to stop global warming, but what about what we want? So the focus today is on what world do we want to see in 2030? So myself, my name is Charles Appleby. I'm the founder of NoCO2.org. Many people at the moment are wondering what to do about global warming. So what we do, we make it easy. Plant lots of trees and remove your carbon footprint. So thanks to the rest of the panel for joining us. Just let me say a few words and then over to yourselves to introduce yourselves. So my very good friend, Jeremy, who's been with us on a couple of webinars now, to Mariam and Faizan, who were here on our last webinar. Welcome to you. And also to, we're still waiting for Jenny Chapman, who, Gary, over to you with the technology with Jenny. But over to you to introduce yourself. So Mariam, would you like to start?
Hi, I'm Mariam. I'm the NYP for Hillingdon, and I'm looking to study international relations next year in university.
Thank you. So Faizan, over to you.
Hi, I'm Faizan. I'm 30. I'm a member of the Parliament for Redbridge. Right now I'm studying my GCSEs, but hopefully I'll go on to university and study astrophysics.
Wow, astrophysics. Jeremy, you did geography, which is a bit smaller scale than that. So Jeremy, you need to turn your microphone on. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello everybody, yes, I'm Jeremy. I've had a background in the oil heating industry, fossil fuel, and I'm a long-standing friend and associate of Charles's.
Thank you, Jeremy. Excellent, great friend. So I'm going to come in a minute to Mariam for her thoughts, first point in the discussion. But let's just do, first of all, let's just do a quick fire response round, okay? So the question here is, where do we want to stop global warming at? So, as I say, today we're on track for 2.6 degrees. The Paris Agreement talked about well below 2 degrees. There's been a lot of discussion about 1.5 degrees. And then just in the last couple of weeks, there's a new formulation coming from COP26 and UNFCCC. And so the new formula is about this year doing what's necessary to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. Okay, so let's make a start here. Jeremy, do you want us to kick off on this? What point do you want to stop global warming at?
I'd be happy to go with the UN and COP26 ambition. I think that they've got a lot of good scientists on board there, and a lot of major governments. And so the 1.5 within reach seems a very reasonable thing to go for.
You're being very reasonable. Mariam, are you being reasonable?
I think that we shouldn't allow there to be such a leeway. I think that if we create a leeway of like how much can we go, it encourages people in some way to okay, it's fine, we can just about reach there, we can just about push it. I think you're encouraging that. I think if we say now is the time, like we need to stop now, that will encourage people to quickly start cutting what they're doing now, so we start to see more immediate effects.
Well, so Faizan, what are your thoughts?
I agree with Mariam, but like in the sense that like we stop now and then we just like see that the emissions like slowing down and like it just needs to slow down first and then it eventually gets to a stop. Yeah.
Right. Okay, great answers. Yeah, I mean, certainly Mariam put it very, very well about the point about the leeway. I think this year is for me a year to really go for the target. The target is 1.5, and it has to be that because as Mariam has put it, otherwise we just we're just opening up the door to other things. Okay, so let's start with the key points that you'd like to raise. So Marion, back over to you.
I think a key vision, if you will, for 2030 is to ensure that all younger years and older years, so we're looking at primary school and secondary school, have climate change as a subject that you study. And I think it's important to incorporate this in the younger years and in the older years, because from the younger years, you instill this idea that they carry on further. It is proven that if you instill ideas from a young age, so like ensuring people about knife crime, being aware of that, it keeps them aware. And so the same thing can happen in primary schools. And I think it's not far-fetched to say that starting from year 1, year 2 is difficult to talk about the environment. I think that you're able to really bring the young people into this and prepare them for the future and make them aware of what could happen.
Okay, so education for younger people. I mean, really, I think that's a really important point. But my point would be is that what I'm aware of is that there's a lot of older people who don't know what they need to know about climate change and the rest. So, Jeremy, do you want to come in on this one? What do you think, Jeremy? Do we all need climate education, or is it really just in schools?
I think when you first asked me to come onto this panel, Charles, you said, what is your vision as what can be achieved in 2030? And I agree with what Mariam said about children, but the thing that I would like to focus on, which is quite a good example of the dilemmas we face, is about diet. I would like to see in the UK and all over the world there to be a substantial will from ordinary people to change their diet. And we know that in terms of climate change, how our present meat and sugar-based diets are not good for the climate. But this is where Mariam's point about schools is very important, because if the children can learn that, they will grow up into adults that will be more vegetarian biased. I mean, my generation are very meat biased. I am very meat biased. It's a difficult thing to give it up when you're at my age. But if the whole of the world population is moving on to more vegetarian type food, that would make a substantial difference.
So just to check what you're saying here, Jeremy. So Marion put on the table the point about education. You put on the table the point about diet. So you're saying that in order to achieve a better diet, a more plant-based diet, are you sort of pointing to the importance of education as part of this?
I think the governments have got in the West anyway, America, Britain, France, etc. The governments have got to take a lead, and we've already seen what happens when you try and put a sugar tax on. They've got to confront the lobbies. They've got to help educate the populations. But I think for people of our age, Charles, it's still going to be a very hard ask to get a large number of people to switch their diets. But for younger people, if it's taught in the schools and it's explained to them, you then start creating a virtuous circle. So when we've all gone off, everybody will be vegetarian, or nearly everybody.
Okay. All right. So Faizan, we've got a couple of topics on the go here. We've got education and we've got diet. So what do you think, Faizan?
I think the main point here, in my opinion, is it should be the increased and rapid reduction in the dependability of fossil fuels for energy. So this is because as we all know, fossil fuels, they such as coal, oil, natural gas, etc., they do release carbon dioxide, which does go into the atmosphere as heat, which is how the heat builds up in our atmosphere. And so because we've all found out the new technologies for, say, for example, wind energy, solar energy, all of them are renewable energies. So if we're able to stop the fossil fuel industry in not as quick as possible, but I'm not.
Okay, so let's come back to you then, Marion. Right, so we now got 3 subjects on the go. So what do you want to say?
I think I'll relate back to Jeremy's point because he says very valid points. I think that also when you look at educating children and young people in schools, they take it back to their families, and I think there you actually spread this knowledge to older generations like your parents, your grandparents. I think that's important, and I think that people also ask the question of how can we actually install this into our education system. People do ask, like, it is already a very packed system, and I'd say to them that we need to from every aspect of the subject. We need to totally reform our education system and what we learn. And within that, we can put the environment and learning about climate change within subjects, particularly like geography, because I think it really relates to climate change. And geography is something that you learn throughout the years. And I think like gradually putting it in there, you further bring awareness.
Okay. Well, Jeremy studied geography, so you're a bit of an expert here. But something that I would like to put on the table, which I'm very much aware of, is that on coronavirus, there's messages all the time from government that okay, those messages evolve, right? But on climate change, the government is doing stuff, but I don't see anything like the same sort of messaging. So, but myself, Mariam, I'm really interested in your point about education in schools, because obviously that's something that you know about. But I feel also for adults the importance of education for adults, starting with messaging from the government, and absolutely, Jeremy, as part of that, I would see diet as one of those subjects for education.
I had a thought when preparing for this that, of course, we've got to protect our NHS because of the COVID pandemic, but of course you could just morph that message to protect the NHS from all the people who are landing up in hospital because of their diet. This is a national scandal, really. I mean, how many amputations for type 2 diabetes? 150 a day or something, legs and coming off? I mean, this is really all about messaging and propaganda, but putting it in a way that people can understand and people can actually resonate with, particularly the younger people. I mean, I think that's the under 30s, the key group here to try and get to.
Well, I have to pick you up on propaganda, Jeremy. I mean, the whole messaging about climate change, the need to do stuff, absolutely is not propaganda. I mean, it's the key thing for me is that the government society is way behind the curve in messaging this out to people. But anyway, Faizan had an interruption. So back to Faizan, you were talking about reducing fossil fuels. So back over to you.
Yes. So like as I was saying, like coal, oil, natural gas, they're all like fossil fuel industries, which produces carbon dioxide, and it goes into our atmosphere, which produces heat, which is like one of the main reasons why there's like a lot of increased heat in our atmosphere. And so like because we have renewable energy, which is quite recent, so like we have solar energy, geothermal, hydroelectric, we have all these renewable energies in which we can use. I think it's not like immediately cutting down the fossil fuel industry, it's just like doing it as quick as possible so like that we can see the emissions slow down, and like there's an increase in renewable energy. Just one main factor is cost, because like not using too much of a renewable energy does increase the cost, but if you use it at a like normal rate, then it should be fine.
I mean, to pick you up on that point, Faizan, we've known, the world's known for, I don't know, quite a long time, the fossil fuel industry is known for 20 years that they're going to need to reduce. The Paris Agreement in 2015 made it very clear that fossil fuels and CO2 need to be reduced. And yet every year we seem to use more. So I contest that point you just made. I think it is time to put in place measures to actually reduce the amount of fossil fuels that are burned. So unless we do that, it seems to me there's always going to be ways found around the corner to stop this. So one of the mechanisms that's been tabled is carbon pricing. Carbon pricing is a way to increase the cost of fossil fuels relative to other fuels, as seen by people. And another one is the cost of pollution. So who else would like to come in on that one? So, including you, Gary, who want to say something on that?
Yeah, makes sense. But I think Jeremy made a good point before that if we force people to do things, it generally doesn't happen. To create movement, you've got to do it with your heart. And what I guess I'm a moving experiment. Since I've known Charles, he's educated me on so many different things to do with the environment. I thought I knew, but now I'm very, very conscious of a carrier bag or planting a tree or I'm so in tune with the environment where before I wasn't. So I believe that education is the way forward rather than punishing people with extra taxes, would be my opinion on that.
Can I just say something about Faisal's point? I looked into this issue about how we replace natural gas, which produces a third of all the greenhouse gases. And interestingly, there is an option of putting hydrogen into the gas mains, which is doable technically, but there are problems with it. It's more expensive. It produces CO2 in the manufacture of it. The alternative was to put everybody onto electricity, air source heat pumps, but that's very expensive. And for oil heating, which I used to represent in my job, there is a 100% biofuel that can be put in, but that again will be more expensive. So you've got an issue of cost here, you've got an economic issue, and I think that's what the governments and the big companies and the consumers have really got to grapple with. Because you can't wave a magic wand and suddenly say you've got to have, fossil-free heating, because it can't be done. And people want to be heated.
Okay. So we've got a question come up here from the audience. So it was a pity we haven't got Jenny on the panel, because the question is about the question really is about population. So this is something relevant on I think the population in the UK is the natural growth in the population, as I understand it, is slower, but certainly the population worldwide seems to be growing about 1% per annum. So anybody like to have a go at this question for us?
Again, a real life experience. I don't think if I'd known the impact that I had on the world, I quite likely would have had a smaller family. I think again, this is about education. As simple as that.
Well, thank you, Gary. It's very, very, very honest of you. So it brings us back to the education point. Certainly on a world scale. Mariam, do you want to talk to that world implication of population?
As in terms of education, like educating the general population. I think that if we start as an example as the UK by educating these year groups and these younger years and older years even, if we start by that, it leads as a world example. It makes other countries follow on, and it actually spreads this message, because you have very engaged, like young people are very engaging, they're on social media, they're out there. When you hear people put these opinions out there, it actually brings a discussion, and the discussion is part of the education which goes on to other countries and spreads. And I think that way we also stimulate like a reduction in sorry, what's the word, in like sorry, it's just left my brain. We stimulate the conversation. I think that's the most important thing. We stimulate the conversation for other countries to also talk about, and I think that's where you actually start seeing an impact, when people start talking about it.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's come back to other points. So anybody else like to chip in with any other points about your vision for 2030? Who'd like to have a go?
I think the point about that Mariam was just making about education, I did read a few years ago that one of the ways to tackle climate change is to educate women, which particularly about the developing world. But if women are educated, they have less children, so you start really tackling the population issue. But also they do tend to sort of curb the excesses of men in that country, if I could put it that way. And I see this as a key issue. Actually, it's interesting. We say that we can cut fossil fuels and all this sort of stuff, but I think if we can get women in the developing world educated to the same level as most people are in the West, that would be an enormous step.
Thank you. Faizan, do you have another point you'd like to make?
No, not at the moment.
Okay, so let me put on the table then, there's been a lot of discussion about nature, the role of nature. So we started off with the climate change as being a big subject, and back in 2015 this was the driver of what was going to happen. And then what seems to have emerged year on year, as more and more issues come out. So this issue of plastics, plastic bags, then it's plastics in the ocean, then it's plastics getting into fish, all this sort of stuff. And then we've got the issue of nature, the damage to nature, damage to biodiversity, damage to wildlife. And then a more recent issue again is the issue of soil quality. So generally soil quality is going down through monoculture, agriculture, through use of fertilizers and pesticides and stuff. So
Charles, can I give Jeremy the option of returning a message for what's on social media? And I want to give you the opportunity for this. Davina, thank you for tuning in. This is a question from Facebook. As a woman, I take offense to saying it's about educating women. So I just want for you to clarify that, because I don't think you meant any offense whatsoever at that.
No, sorry about that, Davina. What I meant was that in the developing world, a lot of girls don't have any education at all, and it's important that they are given, a proper education. I wasn't meaning it about the women in the West need education. Sorry.
See, the purpose for why we do this is to create a lovely, wonderful world. A legacy behind us. So I wanted Jeremy, you to return that, because where we are here is a safe space, a place where people can talk and feel comfortable with that. So Charles, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Please continue. And you see, our message goes out far and wide, but it's good to get clarification on that.
Okay, so let's just come back to the role of nature. So protecting nature, restoring nature. Anybody else like to respond on that one?
I would just chip in something. I think when you look at nature, we can also talk about fashion and its sustainability and how it affects nature generally. Because we see that so many companies, they sell clothes and people buy these clothes, but you immediately throw them out. Many people actually throw them out. They don't, go to a charity shop and give it to them. And when these clothes do actually end up on landfills and whatever, most of the material that is used is polyester, I believe it is, which is I think 60% roughly of the clothes, and is next to impossible. It's very hard to actually break apart and actually help. It doesn't help the soil. It's very limiting, and it just piles up and it actually hurts the soil and the environment because you don't allow for it to it's not biodegradable. I believe that's the word, and I think that's a concern that the fashion industry need to look at, as the materials that they use in the clothing.
So like with nature, we've got this, the world is looking at plans to have 30% of the planet protected. The idea is that CO2 emissions are reduced ideally by 50% by 2030. So in terms of implementing this, Barry, you've made a strong argument to do something about it. So is it a matter of a sort of, are we talking about like with petrol and diesel cars? Are you thinking in mind of sort of having a ban on this by a certain date? Or is it more about sort of a phasing down, so I mean, I guess if you're phasing down polyester, then you're phasing in, what are you phasing in? You're phasing in traditional cotton materials or clothes made of bamboo, or what sort of stuff?
I think when you look at it realistically, when we think of something realistically, it would be it's easier to, slowly and steadily actually reduce the amount. But if we want to see the effects and we want to see dedication, it should be happening immediately. And this can be done, I think, through various ways. I think a key way is actually having a checklist for companies to ensure that they're actually meeting this and they're not just saying, oh, yes, we will. I think that's the key way. But in theory, I think, or practically, I think people will slowly start to, if the government puts pressure and if they ensure that it happens. But if we want immediate effects, I think the best way is to ensure that companies have a checklist and they need to meet these criteria.
Okay, Jeremy, do you want to come in on this one?
I don't know that I mean, I can make a comment about the transport issue because I used to be involved in that as well. I would like to see by 2030, we're talking about 2030 vision here, I would like to see at least 20% of the new car market to be electric cars.
Okay.
You might think that's a bit cautious, but I think the other thing that we need to have with it is a government-sponsored network of charging points, perhaps 3,000 around the country. I don't think we're anywhere near that figure at the moment. I think we also need a scrappage scheme because, we've got 25 million, 30 million cars, haven't we? I mean, I'm not talking about the vans or the lorries at this stage. And everybody in rural areas like where I live, a car is part of your standard of living. You've got to have a car, otherwise you can't exist, you can't work, anything. So, we've got to have an incentive to get rid of the other cars. I think this is all doable, but again, the government have got to play a lead, I think, to make it work.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, there was a discussion earlier today on around this with someone who was saying, look, what do I do about my my sort of petrol intensive V6 car? So I think the main thing is for me is not to buy a brand new one, not to buy a brand new petrol or diesel car like that. And if necessary, to keep the one you've got, not use it so much, or get a second-hand one, because at the end of the day, cars when they're in the loop, they stay being used, they stay in use. So this is where the scrappage comes in, Jeremy. Scrappage scheme comes in. Absolutely, the cars have got to be taken out of the loop altogether in order for electric cars to make a difference. So Faizan, cars. You've got a point on cars, transport.
No.
May I chip in something about, sorry, I already chipped in, but may I add in another point?
Sure.
I think that we should, and it is really important to actually move towards electric cars. But I think in the process of doing that, and if we want to, move to that in a quicker manner, I think if we improve the transportation system, like public transportation system across the UK, for example, especially in rural areas, for example, and improve it, and actually have access, that will hopefully reduce the amount of cars that we actually see out there, and with more people using public transportation. I think that's one way to slowly but quickly transition to electric cars.
Well, you saw on the news this week that in France you're not allowed a short hop aeroplane journey. So from Paris you have to get the train to different cities around. I think that's a massively brave move. What politicians tend to do is they will think very short term how long they're going to stay for. That will be very, very unpopular, and I have to commend the French for taking such a brave move. For me, this debate is about what world do we want to live in, and I want to not have to worry and have any anxiety that the planet will be fine, and it's the steps that we have to play in that way, and because I'm conscious of time as well. I'd love some questions from the audience, and really to recap that. If that's the dream, that we turn on the television and there isn't a global emergency, what process are we going to have to do to get there? Would be my question to the panel.
Well, let's pick up on Gary. You've made a really good point about what France is doing. Okay, your comment straight away is it seems a bit radical. But what do our panel think about that? Who'd like to speak to that idea of restricting planes within the UK and saying when you've got to travel by by train? What do people think about that? Is 2.5 hours by train, is that the right length of time for the UK? What do you think?
I think there's France and Britain are slightly different, in as much as France has got a bigger land mass. But it's a very difficult thing to do in practice, this, because you've got an airline industry that employs lots of people. Okay, its CO2 outputs are greater than the trains, but the British system is not nearly as advanced as the French system in terms of TGVs, very rapid trains. We don't have a high-speed network really in Britain. We have a moderately high-speed network. So again, you can't really compare the two countries. I would like to make a point, just to go back to Marianne's thing. In the country where you've got really sparse populations, public transport is a no-go. You could possibly have minibuses, but I mean, where I live in Suffolk, the people in the villages have to have cars or taxis. There's no economics to run public transport there. So, obviously London, the suburbs, or Manchester, that's great, but you've got to have individual transport.
Okay. So do people think we could do do you think we could do the same as in France, or are you saying that wouldn't work here?
I think with improved infrastructure, it could be possible. But I think that it is important that we improve infrastructure. But we also need to think that I'm not entirely sure of France's landscape, but we do have quite divided areas, for example. So we have London and we have Manchester, for example. That's quite a difference away. So it is going to be difficult. But if the government put dedication and they find proper ways to get around this, then why not?
Yeah. Well, certainly from my experience, if you're trying to drive from London to Edinburgh or Glasgow, that's a long way, and it's logical to go for a business meeting. If you need to travel, which thanks to Zoom we don't necessarily need to. If you need to travel, then that's a journey that people typically do by plane. Whereas London to Birmingham should be something that's pretty easy by train. And then London to Manchester, it can go either way, and that's the sort of journey. London to Manchester would be the sort of journey that maybe people could switch to the train instead. Now, Gary, we've got about 10 minutes to go with this panel. We've got a choice of overrunning here, or we could basically say, look, final points to. Final 10 minutes of discussion to bring conclusion to here. What do you think, Gary?
Nothing focuses the mind more than a deadline. I think let's do it. Let's try and recap all the best things. We haven't talked about concrete. We haven't talked about more trees. There's so much to it. And when you think about a problem, a challenge, you should really think 80% solution, 20% problem. So what are some of the solutions that we want to see? Because I think we all agree that we want to wake up and not have a global crisis on our hands. How do we get the will of the people rather than forcing their hand?
Okay, Jeremy.
I'd just like to make an observation on leadership, and I'd be interested in the younger people's views on this. But I mean, the world, the country has been in difficult situations before. How on earth did Britain decide to stand up against Hitler in 1940 when we were completely defeated in France? How on earth did the West manage to eradicate the blight of smoking? That was through public education generally. But I'm just using those as examples of enormous radical things that have happened. How did America get itself out of the Great Depression in the 30s with Roosevelt's New Deal? If you were in America in 1931, the Dust Bowl going, millions unemployed, you would think this is forever. So I think it's a matter of human will, and human will is represented by political leadership. You've got to have political leaders who in some ways voice what people are feeling and knowing in their hearts. This isn't intellectual. And I mean, this is where the whole planet, Save Our Planet thing has gone a bit wrong, because the people, the scientists tend to be very intellectual, and they're not, I mean, I think No CO2 has done a terrific job because they've done a simple solution that anybody who cares can do something straight away with modest sums of money. You know, that's exactly what we need, something that's going to move people's hearts, and we need leaders to do that.
Wow, great point, Jeremy. So, who's next on that one?
I'll chip in again. I think that I totally agree, I think, with Jeremy. And I think we need leaders to be unafraid to say this stuff, because they seem, in some ways, quite reserved in saying and talking about the climate, because they don't want to, be it hurt big businesses or, hurt people who are not very interested in the climate itself. Like, if it's not an interesting topic for their voters, then they're not going to really speak about it, but they need to speak about it because it is it's a growing topic. And I think another way that we can, bring this awareness and bring this sort of movement, if you will, is by also having local, small groups that support the environment. So you'd have, I say young people because I, surrounded by young people, like groups in each area or each region that are like, bringing awareness, bringing a movement about climate change, and they come together and they bring the same message. I think if you have small pockets that come together, it really brings the movement forward.
Okay. So Jeremy, thank you for putting on the table the point about the trees. I mean, I'm very much in favour of people doing what they're inspired to do. Particularly in 2021, I really wish that more people would do more things. If you're wondering what to do, then as Jeremy has pointed out, planting trees is something which is very, very easy. On the screen behind me, the details. Go to the website n0co2.org, and you can donate and plant a load of trees. And one of the things about this is that if you're thinking of cutting CO2 emissions, which we all need to do, and it's very, very important to cut our CO2 emissions, and diet, for example, Jeremy put on the table earlier as a way of doing this. But actually, you can plant a lot of trees, and if you do plant a lot of trees, then they can remove a lot of your CO2 emissions. So it's very simple. We plant 9 trees for every pound that you donate. So Gary, back over to you to.
Yeah, what a segue into the next topic, because the panel 2 is how to inspire people to take action, and I always like to get the next panel on, and then we transition into the next panel. This has been a great debate, I think. And I think that these tiny things, tiny movements, can create big ripples in the water. What we need, this recording will be on social media to like, share, comment. I have to thank all the panelists for giving up your time. We really appreciate that. And this is all leading towards the next COP. And the reason Charles picks the 15th is because it's a 1.5. There's a limit there. There's a stretch movement. Sorry, Charles, what were you going to say?
So Gary, if you want to bring the folks on, I'd just like to ask everybody for a final comment, if you'd like to. Now, if you had one wish about 2030, which you wanted. Maybe something different than you've said already, or reinforce the same point. But if you've got one wish for 2030, what would that be? So who'd like to go first on that?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I would wish that governments look at the education system and reform it to include climate change as part of the topic that young people look at.
Okay. So who's next?
Well, it's very close to my own heart, but in the rural areas, a lot of people heat their homes with oil. I hope that the government will allow them to go to a 100% biofuel to heat their homes, not force them onto air source heat pumps, which don't tend to work in their older houses.
There's a lot of banging going on. For me, I hope that the government puts some resource into planting more trees and deforestation. That was Charles' favourite one. I hope that we're more mindful of having large families. That would be great. And then that the conscience is such an interesting thing, that our conscience leads the way when it comes to polluting our rivers, making choices of buying our next car, or maybe travelling in a low emission way. Charles, you asked the question. Why don't you answer it? What would be your wish?
I think I would make the point here about the importance of nature. So we've covered trees, Faizan covered cutting CO2, Marian's made points about education. All of these are important. I think the one I'd like to put on the table, as I say, is the point about is this point about nature. Dean proposed that 30% of the planet is protected, and in order to do that, we need both to protect and to restore nature, rewilding, all of these sorts of things. I think it's very, very important. We need to progress on that, and we can actually make a lot of progress, not only in the UK but worldwide on that, towards that target by 2030. Thanks, Gary. Faizan, do you want to just come in on your point about cutting greenhouse gas emissions?
I'll just say my point about what I wish for 2030.
Sure.
So it's quite similar to Jeremy's point, but it covers a wider range of things. So I basically like current fossil fuels to be reduced like as quick as possible, and like to be replaced with renewable energies. Well, maybe not hydrogen, but yeah.
Okay. Great. Thanks for that. So, well, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Hope to see you again. And so, Gary, over to you to bring on the
our next panelist. If you turn your cameras on when you speak, you take the stage. It's worth introducing yourselves. I'm going to take permission away from the last panelist, but while you introduce yourself, Mark, you're the first one on. Donna, have you any comments on what we previously spoke about? No pressure. Your subject is how to inspire people to take action. That's a tricky one. Ladies first. Donna, do you want to tell us what you thought of the debate and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Gary. Hi, nice to see you again.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Donna Stimson. I am a local councillor in Windsor and Maidenhead, and my portfolio is I'm on cabinet for climate change, sustainability, parks and countryside. Also a trustee of Heal Rewilding, which is an incredibly exciting rewilding charity that's just that fledged about a year ago, and I thought the young people were extraordinary. Sorry, Jeremy, I did think you were great too, but wow. I mean, if that's what we've got to contend with going forward, this world's in safe hands. And guys, I'm sorry we've made a mess that we have to help you clean up. But those, Marianne and Faizan were just extraordinary. So those are my opening remarks. Thank you for asking.
Well, thank you for Donna for that acknowledgement about the older generation having made a mess. I mean, what can one say?
I'm in there too, by the way.
Sorry?
I'm in there too.
Certainly, I think we didn't know. We didn't know. I mean, James Hansen presented to the US Congress in 1989, and I don't think we knew about that. That didn't make it into the news. What certainly the 2006 the Al Gore film, An Inconvenient Truth, certainly that made it into the news, and we all saw that. But somehow watched the film and then sort of said, "Well, that's terrible." Then you went off and had a cup of coffee or a drink or something, and you thought, well, you sort of made it through to the next day. It didn't have that follow through impact that it might have done. Gary, do you want to get Mark Drexler on? We saw him briefly.
Yeah, Mark is actually on. He's there.
Oh, okay, you are here. Great. Yeah. So good for that apology. What I would say is that I think there's a lot of us who are doing what we can, and sadly, there's a lot of people who, back to the education point, they don't know what's happening. There's other people who maybe are not listening to really the news and seeing the impact, and certainly there's people who can do. People who can do a lot more things, and so that really brings us onto the subject we've got here. So Gary, was just waiting for
What?
Maddie. I think is Maddie around?
Everyone is here. Mark, do you want to follow with an introduction on what you thought of the last panel? I think everyone's here.
Sure. My name is Mark Drexler. I started working on climate change actually the year that James Hansen appeared in front of Congress in the U.S., so it's been a while. Gary, in terms of a quick thoughts. One, the first paper seriously concerning, from a scientific perspective, seriously raising the issue of climate change as a threat that would occur during people's lifetimes. That paper was written in 1957. And so we have known about this problem for a long time, and it brings to mind a quote from Margaret Heffernan in her excellent book about willful blindness, and her quote is that in climate change, all the forces of willful blindness come together like synchronized swimmers in a spectacular water ballet. And so it's not that we haven't known about this; it's that we've managed to not think about it and not tackle it. And what one of the things that suggests is how wicked a problem it is. And at the end of the last panel, you made a very interesting point. You talked about we need to be sort of 80-20 in terms of solutions. I'll remind you about a quote from Einstein. And he said, when I'm tackling a problem, I'll spend 95% of my time thinking about the problem and only 5% thinking about the solutions. And that's really critical because there are tons of solutions running around, and we'll get into this during the panel. The issue is we're not thinking enough about why we're not implementing those solutions, why we're not actually tackling the problem. And that's a critical area, and that's where I tend to come at this issue from. It was great to hear the prior panel and the young people, et cetera. Something though to really remember is that a lot of work has been happening on this topic for decades, and so we shouldn't think about this as something new that it's up to the new generation to tackle. There's a huge amount of learning available from the last 50 years of people working on this topic.
Okay, thank you, Mark. Gary, is Maddie around?
Yeah, Maddie is here. Look, she's nodding, smiling. Would you mind introducing yourself? And did you catch the last panel? Tell us your views.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm a first year history student, and I've been working with the NYPs quite closely on some of their climate change campaigns. And yes, I did catch the last panel. I thought it was a very nice segue into we've seen what kind of world we want, and now we've got to try and brainstorm some solutions. But having said that, I do think Mark's absolutely right in saying there's no shortage of these solutions floating about. It's really about galvanizing people into following them, getting a united front, and really, making people see how big of an issue this is, and really kind of picking one solution, really sticking to it. There's so much misinformation around. I think it's really important to get a plan that we really think is viable. So yeah, really exciting.
Okay, so Lashini, over to you. So special welcome to you, Lashini. This is I think this is the fourth one of these. You've been on all our 1.5 events this year, so great welcome to you. And certainly from what I've seen, you folks, and I know you're interested in, a lot of you are interested in politics and international relations, but I can see that you're going to be the politicians of the future. So Donna, you've got to watch out for these young folks. They'll soon be running up into joining you in politics. So Lashini, over to you for your intro, please.
Hi everyone, I'm so excited to be here. You know, it's my fourth one, but I'm still got that excitement because it's great to be on this panel again. My name is Lashini. I'm the Member of Youth Parliament for Brent, and I'm also a first year studying PP at the University of Warwick. I just wanted to quickly pick up on what Donna was saying about us being, you know, the generation to create change. I've said it a countless number of times. I think we are the generation everyone's been waiting for. We have the tools, we have the power, and we want it. We want the change. So I really think the future lies with the young people, along with working with the older generation. And I often think that it's partly a result of misinformation that hurt the climate campaign. You know, so many of these companies going out there and spreading the lies and misinformation and doing it so well, it's almost manipulation, which is crazy to think that even happened. But yeah, as I said before, I think we have the power to create the change, and this is our first step. You know, this is some of the steps we can take. So I'm really excited.
I have a question to pose, Charles. I'd love to ask the panel, where do they think the solution is going to come from? Will it be a scientist, like what Mark said, like somebody who understands physics and science? Will it be a psychiatrist and psychology? Because this is a people-related issue. We did this. Or will it be from somewhere else? From where will, in your opinions, will the solution be found? I'd love to know. Whoever wants to take that question, then over to the panel and let it flow.
Gary, I'm happy to start on that, and I certainly am not arguing that it's going to be a scientist that solves climate change. Definitely not.
Politician, maybe. Who? God forbid a politician do it.
Part of the problem we have here is that we're always trying to figure out where that silver bullet is coming from, or where that silver buckshot is coming from. And is hydrogen the solution, or is carbon capture and storage the solution, or is whatever the solution? That's just not the way to think about this. There are hundreds of solutions, hundreds of pieces on sort of the climate chessboard. And unless we can figure out a way to use all of those pieces in combination to try and get to the other side of the board, we're not going to win this game. And so we can't even really imagine how to win. Because once you start moving the pieces on the board, synergies come into play, things you might not have expected come into play. But right now, because we're all focused just on one piece on the board, we're not playing climate chess, and we're not winning.
Okay. Well, look, let's just start the panel with the introduction. Hold on. Okay. So the panel here is how to inspire people to take action on global warming. Now, this is, as we've just been saying, this is a critically important topic because it has been very elusive. So the way I see it is that now in the world we've got good awareness of global warming, that action is low, and we're still on track for 2.6 degrees. So, Mark, you've raised the question, you've made the point about the Einstein, more time to be thinking about the problem rather than the solution, okay? So we'll come back to you, but Donna's very keen to speak on this. So Donna, let's start with yourself.
I just wanted to respond to Mark because he makes so much sense. And I noticed in the chat there was a comment from Ed Gamel, and I do want to respond to that. And I think a lot of it is tied in together. So from a political perspective, there is an issue because we aren't all shooting in the same direction. And sometimes politics does get in the way. And this is too important to allow that to happen. I mean, this is our planet. There will be no... we can't fight over something that is so key. So we absolutely have to come together. And somewhere in the world, I reckon that someone has found the solution to pretty much everything. Yet all we keep going around trying to find a solution on our own. So this leaders need to absolutely set an example. And one of the key things that I find at a local level is that, the Grantham Institute has said that over 60% of reaching net zero is around changes at a local level in your own home. It's behavioral change. Per street, everything that has to happen is around, a lot of it is around behavioral change. Yes, you can make big grand gestures, but each of us have to do lots of little different things in order to make uncomfortable, sustainable change. And that is where a lot of local people can help and local government can help. So to be dictated to from a higher level is not always the solution that works. But we have to all work together, and we cannot. I mean, what Ed Gemmell was asking me about was, you've declared a climate emergency, let's set a date for 2050. We did that because we had no budget and no officers. So how can we say we're going to get there by 2030 when we don't have the budget? As Mark says, there are so many different issues at play. It's very difficult to just shoot for the moon, but we've got something in play that we know what we're going to do next that's going to raise our agenda to a high level and try and bring our target down.
Okay, well,
it's
Donna,
complicated, but it's exciting. So,
Donna, let's come back to you in a minute and see if
Okay.
you're going to give us a better offer than 2050, okay? Because that's what Ed's asking, okay? But to start off, let's ask Mark, just to set the scene. You're making the argument we're not spending enough time on really identifying the problem. So if you start, then let's bring in Loshini and Maddie, okay? So over to you, Mark.
Okay, well, in terms of sort of the questions that Charles had laid out for the panel, let me sort of start there. And my response to why be excited, well, it's not necessarily excited in a positive way, but we ought to be excited because it is an existential threat. When Charles talks about 2.6 degrees, we really have no idea. It could be 5 degrees, it could be 6 degrees. There are a whole series of scientific uncertainties where we just don't quite know what to expect, and we're rolling the dice of climate change, and that's a bad thing. And it is potentially an existential threat. Why be optimistic? Because I think, as Donna said, we have more tools than we've ever had before. Renewable energy, battery storage have fallen in cost by 90% during the period that I've been working on this topic. So we clearly have more tools. We have more will than we've ever had before. That's certainly the case with the newer generation coming in. Why be skeptical? Because it's still the same wicked problem. And that's what we really need to remember here. Yes, there's an awful lot of behavior change involved, but unless we have the policy to price carbon, for example, we're just not going to see a lot of that behavior change. And so all of these things are linked together. And there are reasons to be excited. There are reasons to be optimistic, but we've really got to think through how to do this, because I don't think our biggest problem today is greenwashing in terms of industry. It's actually green wishing, where everyone wishes to solve this problem. All the net zero 2050 targets that we're seeing in the corporate world and elsewhere and there are some perfectly good reasons for that, as Donna points out. But a lot of that is green wishing, and we've got to get past that if we're actually going to solve this problem.
Okay, well, personally, I'm pleased that we have got the targets and the aspirations, because without that, there's going to be a real mess. But anyway, Loshini, let's come back to you. I think you wanted to be more action oriented on this. So Loshini, then over to Maddie. Tell us how you're going to be more action oriented.
Well, Gary started this off by asking, who is it that we're going to turn to for the solutions? And for me, the biggest one I always think of is influence. Who has the influence to make change? Who are the influencers? Who can convince people that this is a problem? Because I still think there are people out there that don't believe climate change is a problem. And influence it has so many scales. It can be central government, but it can be as small as, telling a family member that we have to think about a problem. We don't realise it, but sitting on this panel today, we're still influencers. Anyone that watches this can be convinced. And I think that's what we need to think of. It's not always about looking to the biggest influencers. It's still about thinking about social media talking amongst friends, I know Marion in the last discussion talked about bring up conversation, which is so important, and that's what I want to do. I think conversation is one of our biggest tools. I know that we have to be action orientated about climate change, but at the same time, if we have conversation, we can hold institutions accountable. We can hold the government accountable if they don't deliver on their promises as well. If we raise this conversation, we have a generation of people who will actually ask up, talk up, question people on what they're doing. Because frankly, what I often do is actually ask my friends, what are you doing? Are you still buying from companies aren't sustainable? Are you still throwing away clothes? Why aren't you giving to Depop? Why aren't you moving to charity shops? It is about questioning and it is about conversation. So I still think there's a lot of action to be taken with conversation.
Fantastic. Well, that's really great. So,
I have to say,
Gary,
Charles,
then Maddie.
Yeah, Charles, let me just say an observation that your mixture of young and old here is just the right mix. Lashini, you speak with such passion. That can't be faked. That authenticity. We need that. This is so great that we're all together in this mixing pot. That's all I wanted to say, is that the fact that, Charles, you're brilliant, you're a genius. To mix the two ages is great. Brilliant.
Okay, back over to Maddie.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are saying is that we really need this kind of grassroots, on the ground behavioural change. I think it's so tricky, like Ashina was saying, to see who are the people who are going to influence that. I think one of the main things we can try and do is sort of initiate a kind of nudge culture, which I think is usually a sort of workplace phrase, but just sort of making slight changes to people's environment, just to encourage them towards more sustainable choices. I think a good example is the 5p plastic bag initiative, which was just one small thing. And I think people can be often overwhelmed by their decisions. Seems to be a lot of misinformation. It seems really tricky to decide and know how to make sustainable choices. But if we have this very sort of simple nudge culture, you just got to just make these very small changes in your life and find who can influence people into doing that, then I think you're well on your way to getting real big change just on the ground. I think that is a really good place to start.
So, well, Donna, over to you.
Thanks, Charles. Two examples come to mind for me. I'm working with my schools colleague, and so we've got letters out to, and we've had responses back from all the schools, the headmasters, and the schools are starting to work with us on lots of different policies, whether they are about putting solar panels on their roofs, or rewilding parts of them, or building vegetable gardens and that sort of area. And also some of them have got really exciting projects where they're fund matching something in Africa, like the solar panel project that's happening both in Southern Africa and in the UK. And then on the other side, I'm working with Geeky Zero. I don't know if you've heard about Geeky. It's called Know Your Get Involved, Know Your Impact, and it's that same sort of nudge thing. I'm a local champion there, and so that's about understanding your carbon footprint and just starting to make small changes. But then on the planning side, just putting together sustainability and energy efficiency. A policy for planners, so that we'll have 100% EV chargers and things like that, because we don't have a borough local plan that's up to date at the moment, so we have to make other changes. So in a local authority, you can actually influence, and there we've got 150,000 homes where we can where we can make a difference to. So it's small, it's small potatoes when you think of the whole world, but if each one of us have an influence over some people, it does all add up. So what every one of us is saying, I think, is on the same track, and we just all have to keep at it, all day, every day. And it's we heal ourselves, we heal the world. We just keep on at it, and I just think it's good for your soul, really, at the end of the day as well.
So let me ask you, Donna, on the last panel, Marion was passionate about education, and we picked up from education into the fact that there's not been there's been government action on climate, but there hasn't been government really solid communication. And if there is communication, then that could address the need for action at all levels, big business, small business, community, individuals, whatever. So going forward, how do you see that issue of communication coming from the government? Do you have any insight into what sort of communication there might be? And is this going to be before COP26 or really after, not till afterwards? How do you see this?
I don't know what's happening at a government level, but certainly at a local authority level, there are two things that we're doing. The one is I was talking to One Planet Learning Bioregional. I don't know if you know the group, but we're getting on board with some schools in the States and Canada where they're doing some pretty amazing stuff, and we're going to replicate it in the Royal Borough. We have something called the Berkshire Schools Eco Network, where the school kids actually take over, and they just are supervised by teachers. And so they bring up projects in the environment, because in some school there's only one kid who's really interested. And so we want to be able to support them. But in terms of teaching, what I'm trying to do is start to influence the curriculum and have a policy discussion about how do we bring a curriculum into the curriculum, learning about carbon and teaching them about about the value of environmental. It has to come into the curriculum. It's absolutely imperative. But I don't know what's happening at the government level.
Yeah, I mean,
the discussion I've had yet.
In the last discussion, Marion was very articulate about that. So you may like to include her as part of your virtual team on that one, Donna.
Thank you.
But let's get back over to Mark, because you hadn't finished articulating your points on this, Mark.
Well, thinking a little bit about this individual action, collective action, systems change thing, I think the way that I tend to think about it is that I think pretty much everyone can agree that at the end of the day we need collective action. Now, obviously, individual action is key to collective action, and Lashini happened to have mentioned sort of the one thing that literally everyone can do, and there's a lot of literature suggesting it's actually the most effective thing for sort of the average individual to be able to do, and that's just talk about climate change. There's some hilarious stories around about uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinners where somebody tries to talk about climate change and it just turns into an absolute fiasco. But Thanksgiving in the U.S. But talking about climate change is key, but not all individual action is created equal. And so a lot of the things that we might do are good to do, they're good for our soul, et cetera, but they don't all add up to collective action. And I think one thing we really need to pay attention to is how can we help people figure out what it is that they can do at any given time with their resources, with their background, with their time availability, et cetera, to most contribute to collective progress on this issue. And unfortunately, that website to do that organization to do that does not exist. There is no reason in the world it couldn't exist with today's artificial intelligence and capabilities, but we're still too siloed. We're all focusing on our silo, and we're not thinking about how can we jump around to be pushing the most effective buttons at any given time based on our capabilities. And we desperately need an organization or someone to step up to help do that, because that's where we're going to really be able to catalyze progress with all of the efforts and all of the initiative and all of the motivations that we're seeing today.
Well, Mark's a very interesting one. I mean, we've got this idea of 1.5 each month. So we've got 15th of May, 15th of June, and 15th of July. We've got all these meetings, right? So, Gary and I, we don't have any plans. We do this one step at a time. So you're very welcome to suggest some actions for these dates, and we can work together on this. Yeah, that would be amazing. In terms of myself, the tree planting is really important, because you can actually plant enough trees, which is what I've done. I've planted enough trees to remove all my CO2 emissions for every year that the trees are growing. So I planted 3,500 trees to do that. So it's something that's relatively easy to do, and you can pay monthly for that. But what I'm aware of is that that's not a solution on its own. It's part of a whole solution, and it's something that clearly not enough people are doing. Otherwise, we'd already planted a couple of billion trees, which we haven't done. So I'm very much open to these sort of ideas. So are you able to be a bit more specific about what could be done? I mean, are we talking about anything that can be done before COP26, or is it really not until after COP26?
Well, no, yeah, it's certainly not before COP26. I mean, to come back to something that Donna mentioned in terms of it has to be part of the curriculum, I agree entirely. But it's worth remembering that if you think back to the 1990s, which is going to be tough for some of the people here, but if you think back to the 1990s, this issue of, well, what do we do about climate change in the curriculum was being discussed. And the answer was, this is an emergency. We do not have time to worry about educating kids. This is an emergency. Here we are 30 years later, and it's still an emergency. And so that brings me back to there are all of these different pieces. Obviously, curriculum has to be one of them. That it's silly to say, forget the curriculum, we're going to solve this in the next 10 years anyway. Not true. But no, there is no simple, unfortunately, Charles, there is no simple answer. I mean, we do walk through how we think this could be done at our Climate Chess website. But it's going to require some real resources. It's going to require real use of artificial intelligence. The irony here is that the tools that I'm talking about are exactly the same tools that got Donald Trump elected in 2016 in terms of micro-targeting, getting the right information to the right person at the right time. His campaign used that far more effectively than the climate change people have ever used it to get to the right people and influence their thinking. And so unfortunately, it's not something that 100 of us can do, but it is something that somehow 100 of us need to be starting to talk about, and maybe we catalyze something.
Okay, Jeremy, yeah. Then Loshini, okay?
Just a short point to make here, that you mustn't underestimate the power of the vested interests. I mean, we've heard about the fossil fuel industries, but these are lobbying governments all the time. I mean, and for instance, the issue about oil, I mean, have you got any idea of the taxation that all the governments, I think it's 140 billion euros a year, is paid in tax to the European member states. The governments are to a certain extent not only influenced by these people, they are dependent on the existing economic order. And that's what the climate change advocates such as ourselves have to recognise. You've got to put yourselves in the position of government to try and find a solution for them.
That's a great point, Jeremy. I was aware of something like that. I wasn't aware of the numbers being as big as that, but thanks for putting that on the table. But Loshini, you've done ever so well with your last point about the conversation, because we're moving now on that one. So let's come back over to you. Do you have another one that's going to revolutionise what we're doing here?
Oh, well, I hope everything I say will revolutionise something.
So do I. Okay, go for it.
So I slightly agree with Mark, slightly disagree with Mark. And the point I agree on is the fact that when we're thinking about action in climate change, people are lazy. It has to work for them. If we are trying to convince people, not everyone is like us, not everyone is willing to sacrifice parts of their life for the climate. And that is a truth that we sometimes have to accept. But that doesn't mean that there aren't solutions to work around that. And in terms of providing those solutions, our biggest tool is social media. We are literally sitting on a platform today that is our biggest tool. And for me, I've learned so much through social media about what I can do in my life to positively impact the environment. This starts with clothing and fashion, also cleaning products, the amount of plastic I use. These are all really small changes that are so accessible for each and every one of us. There are so many affordable cleaning products that are sustainable, eco-friendly. There are so many fashion brands that are now gaining a lot of traction because they are sustainable and they don't go into landfill. And one of the weirdest ones I came across the other day was actually clean investing. So people are now investing in stocks and shares which are clean and are, renewable energies. And ESG is actually the biggest new thing in finance, which it shouldn't be. Should have been there all since forever, but unfortunately is the newest trend. So I think there's a lot we can do, and there is a lot available to us. And I agree with Mark that it isn't out there for a lot of people. But this is why we do have to harness what we already have, and that is social media. We have to be putting it out there. Again, conversation means sharing on WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram. The amount of platforms that you have out here is crazy. We have to use this power, each and every one of us. And going back to influence, we have influence ourselves. I could share a post with Mariam today talking about fashion, and that could change her life. Because one thing I do like to say is, these small moments in our life have a massive knock-on effect. Something that you've been told from a young age, which could be a curriculum on climate change, is going to influence you as an adult. That's going to make you think about the decisions you make about buying products, about using your car, about what kind of transport you use as an adult. So again, I think there are small steps we can take, but we have to make them clear and we have to use what we already have.
Okay, so what I'm hearing here then is that in the last panel, Mariam talked about the problems of artificial fibres really not rotting down in the environment and just being chucked out into landfill. Okay, so what I'm hearing you saying, Rashini, then is that by messaging about that in the right way on social media to young people, to influencers, to others, there starts to become a momentum then around people taking action and moving away from those sort of products to more sustainable. So Gary, you're the expert here. We're hearing the possibilities here of combining the ideas and social media and everything.
And we mustn't forget the power of Google. There's a thing called search engine optimization. When you Google something, you're being first place. So there's lots of power there. The influence of the media companies, hopefully they'll get broken up, because I think they are too influential. At the end of the day, I think we'll vote with our feet, and then the politicians will respond. Do you think that's a fair response there, Mark? Will the politicians looking for the next vote care about this?
Well, I mean, the way we've designed our systems, we've designed it about as poorly as we possibly could to tackle a problem like climate change. And that's just the reality. And it gets back to the comment about fossil fuel revenues and all that kind of thing. But, here in the U.S., you've got the House of Representatives that is reelected every 2 years. And so they are out trying to raise money for their next election campaign all the time. And those people do not see any benefit. Generally speaking, I'm talking very generally here, but a politician who has a 2-year cycle or a 4-year cycle will not get any credit for solving climate change, but he or she will get blamed for the costs of trying to solve climate change. And so the political system is totally against us. And yet, without the political system, we can't do it. And so that's one of the aspects of Climate Chest is that through talking to people, by acting locally at the state level, at the federal level, at the international level, we need to find ways around these barriers. And that's one of the useful things about thinking about chess is you can think about what are the pieces on the other side of the board, and how can you not negotiate your way around them, but how can you either defeat them or how can you go around them? And we need to be thinking much more along those lines, because up to date, it's more like we've recreated the charge of the Light Brigade over and over and over again, which for many of you not being familiar with it, it was World War II. Well, no, it was not World War II. Way prior to World War II, where you had the cavalry charging an entrenched artillery position and just getting slaughtered. Songs were written about them. It was all very heroic, but they did get slaughtered. And we're sort of doing the same thing politically on this, and we've got to figure out ways to recognize how challenging these barriers are and how can we overcome them, and really talk about that.
Okay, well, let's see if Maddie can give us some inspiration here. Maddie, over to you.
I do think what Mark was saying is that we really are best placed now for that. I think you look at the conversation we were having, a couple of decades ago around climate change, and it wasn't nearly as mainstream. I think again that's linked a bit to what Lashini was saying. Is a part of that is down to social media. So we really are at a position at this point where we can galvanise and make the politicians care from a kind of grassroots level. I think is something we're really best placed to do now. But I think there is a bit of a problem that social media is a double-edged sword, which a lot of people are aware of. It can be a tool to spread misinformation on a global scale just as much as really helpful positive information. So I think there really does need to be some kind of guidance from top-down level, perhaps, a kind of clear, these are the steps we need to be taking from the government sort of thing. Something which doesn't require them to make too many sacrifices, but gives proper clear guidance and minimises the misinformation that can be spread around on social media. So I really do think that is a tool that can be used brilliantly, but also it does go both ways.
Okay, Donna, I think you have to speak.
Yes, thank you. I just have to kiss my child goodbye first.
Goodbye,
child. So here's an issue that I've been trying to gain traction on social media and it hasn't worked. The absolutely brilliant Dasgupta review on biodiversity. I don't know if any of you have read it, but it's absolutely stunning.
Yeah.
It talks about how we don't value natural capital because it's free, the way we value other capital like ships or buildings. And we use it as a carbon sink and we treat it like rubbish. We just, put our ships and drop our oil and just treat it like nothing. And imagine if we were all asset managers and we valued it and we charged people for ships, like for instance, as they went over our beautiful seas, and it became part of our GDP instead of trashing it and treating it like nothing. So does anyone have a view on that? Because that would solve it. Valuing on natural capital and putting a price on it would maybe be a way, or is that beyond the scope of this conversation?
No, I certainly do. I mean, for me, there are three things going on with the environment, with nature specifically. The Dasgupta review, one of them, and to give people an example, what he's saying, which is maybe a bit radical, is saying that, look, if the world values the Amazon, then countries should think about paying Brazil to preserve the Amazon. Okay, so he's not putting any prices on it, but that's the sort of thing he's saying. So there's that. Then you've got this I think it's called the High Ambition Coalition, which is saying that 30% of the planet should be protected, 30% of the land, 30% of the sea should be protected, which I think is really important. And then thirdly is the World Leaders Pledge, so the Leaders Pledge for Nature, which has been signed up to by something like 84 countries, including the UK and the EU. So for me, we really should be taking all of those together and saying that, look, that there needs to be a value put on nature, and to use that positively to protect and restore nature. So
can I make a comment, Charles? For those that are into change management, it looks like a bell curve. So 15% of the population will adapt things quickly, and then the rest of the people follow like sheep. There's a scientific experiment. If two people look up to the sky, most people will walk past. The minute there's more than that, 3 or 4, everybody looks up. So we're human by nature. So what this leads into is what stage are we at with the bell curve? Now in the UK, Mark, Sky News, which is a real mainstream news channel on prime time as of last Wednesday, are dedicating their main slot to the environment. And I think that we're past the 15% stage. But is it going to be quick enough? Will it? That's my fear. Because if we're going to use the 1.5 as a no point of return, how do we get that bell curve quicker? Maybe it will come from a human resources expert on change. Has anyone got any comment on that? Do you see this as mainstream? Because certainly Mark told us it wasn't mainstream several years ago. I think it is in the mainstream, but is it going to be quick enough?
Well, let's ask one of our young team to come in on one of these points. Who'd like to speak?
Nobody. Okay. But you...
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty mainstream, but one of the big issues with that, I think, particularly for young people, is the government not taking them seriously enough and trying to devalue what they're saying on it. I think there's this kind of issue of, yeah, it is big enough for young people now, and you can see that all the climate strikes, but their work and their passion is consistently being undervalued, I think, from the government particularly. So I think really one of the main things that needs to happen is the government taking the young people seriously, supporting them, working with them through initiatives, and trying to break down this perception of, oh, the young people, they don't really know what they're talking about. So I think there is that real mainstream care, particularly for young people. But
are you not feeling heard, Mandy? Are you not feeling heard?
I think there is a bit of a problem with that. I mean, personally, I do, but I think as a collective, particularly politicians don't feel like they're being told what to do by young people. You can see that, Donald Trump and Greta Thunberg, for example. It's trying to undervalue what young people are saying by just the fact that they're young is a reason we shouldn't listen to them, which I just think is completely wrong.
I mean, Trump's moved on, so give us an example now, Maddie, of how you think you're not being valued, because I'm not clear about this. I mean, certainly I think a lot of people are not being heard, so I don't feel I'm particularly heard either. But tell us why you aren't valued.
I just feel like I need to clarify, it's not me personally, I'm not personally taking offence to this, but...
You're representing young people,
yeah, I think a lot of the work that young people are doing is particularly just quite on a small scale, but it only involves young people. So like Gary was saying, I think this event particularly is brilliant because it's got such an age range, but a lot of the work that I've seen young people doing is just focused on young people, and I think that it does undervalue their work slightly, because there really does need to be this sort of intergenerational conversation in order to make real change happen, because young people have a lot of passion, but it's older people who have the resources, and they're the ones who really sort of have their fingers in all the pies to be able to pull the strings and really make that work.
Okay.
I love it when Mark changes his slides.
To come in.
I love it when Mark changes his slides. Something interesting is going to happen. I love it.
Well, let's have Lashini first, and then back to Mark.
So firstly, in terms of making the environment mainstream, I think we also need to talk about environment in terms of culture. And actually, I think it has seeped into culture when we think about David Attenborough documentaries that have huge impacts, and they're spoke about, and that they become a trend after they come out, and that's because of the drama surrounding them. But I think it's good in one sense, but it also has another danger to it, putting like the words emergency and drama around climate change, because it makes people think one small change isn't going to do anything. If I make this small change to my life, that's going to have no impact because there's so much to do with climate change and I can't make the differences. So whether I do this small thing won't have any impact. But I think that's so wrong in so many different ways. And I also want to pick up on what's going on in the chat here, because I have been sitting here just getting a little bit frustrated in my mind about this talk of population and children and trying to curb the population. I actually did an essay on this 2 years ago, looking into climate, into the population, and I researched kind of the Malthusian trap and looking about what economists would say about overpopulation, how we don't have enough food. But I honestly think it's the lazy excuse for climate change. There's so much more we can do. A lot of these problems, talking about overpopulation, comes down to distribution. There isn't enough redistribution in our society, which is why we blame overpopulation for the environment. We can talk about having too many kids, but what about China? There was a one-child policy there for so many years. They are still a major pollutant. It didn't make much of a difference. So I think it is a lazy excuse for what is actually going on. And there are so many other solutions we have. If you do think, I know, and there is backing and there is data to prove that, overpopulation, if you logically think about it, is going to have an impact on our environment because of demand. I'd urge you to read a book called Donut Economics by Kate Raworth, one of the best books I've ever read in my entire life. And it just talks about how we need to mould our economy around the people and think about it in a circular way. So when we think about a production line, it often has start to finish. But why is it not a circular production line? That we regenerate a product instead of just throwing it away. There are so many different things we have to talk about, and I'm sorry I'm getting frustrated with people in this chat. It's not a personal thing, but I'm not a big fan of blaming climate change on overpopulation.
Ashini, can I share something with you? Me and 30 business owners did an experiment last month. We all planted 2 sunflower seeds, and the point will be made in a second. And science can't explain everything. So the point I'm trying, 2 sunflower seeds, one we were kind to, and one we were mean to. Every single person, and it was scientific, we put them in the same place. Every single person, the plant that we were kind to grew higher. Like, there are things that we just don't understand about the ecosystem and the environment, and I think that humans try and be a bit too clever. It's so simple. We just reduce our carbon, and I think you're right, it is a little bit lazy. Just say we'll have one less child. But like Mark said, it's a mixture. I love your passion, I have to say. I love it. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in, that there are things that we can't explain yet as well. Mark, your new slide, sir.
You can take a look at that, but I'm not going to talk about it. It's just a couple quotes that I find fascinating in this space in terms of how much work has gone on before. But let me try just to pull together a couple of threads from the conversation of the last several speakers. Gary, you made a crucial point. This is a speed issue. This is not an ultimate outcome issue. We didn't leave the Stone Age because we ran out of stones, and we're not going to leave the fossil fuel age because we run out of fossil fuels. We will get to a low carbon economy. There is no question about that. The problem is that at this point, we're likely to be able to celebrate getting to a low carbon economy on the same day scientists announce that we've committed to 5 degrees centigrade, which would be catastrophic. And so the issue here is one of timing and acceleration. And usually these kinds of transitions take decades to happen, and we don't have decades. And that's the real question, is how do we accelerate things? This is key to the population. And I haven't been watching the chat, Lashini, so I appreciate you bringing that up. But I think there's an interesting twist to this population conversation. Population has absolutely been a key part of getting us to where we are today. So clearly, population, which leads to clearing of forests and all of those different things, a key variable in creating the problem that we have today. The reality, however, is that doing something about population will have basically no impact on whether we solve this problem in the next several decades. That's the inherent contradiction here. Yes, population has been key to getting us to where we are today. Population control and lowering population will, unfortunately, just if you look at the demographics and the trends and the speed with which things happen, will have basically no impact on where we are 20 or 25 or 30 years from today. And that, unfortunate, but true. Very quickly, coming back to a comment from Donna, the whole natural capital conversation, the whole biodiversity conversation, again, these things have been around for decades, these conversations. And I think it's a really tough thing to sell on social media. Another Einstein quote that's really relevant here is, you can't solve problems with the same tools that got us into the problem to begin with. And that's, using markets, for example, for natural capital and ecosystem services, and saying, let's all start paying for everything, let's turn everything into a market. That's sort of, the markets in many respects are sort of what got us into this problem to begin with. And it's never been intuitively clear that we should dig that hole deeper and deeper and deeper. And I'll leave that for now.
Okay, I'd just like to pick up on that, Mark. The situation we've got in the UK very often is that we've got a site that people want to have as housing or mining or factory or something, or roads. People have got a site, and it's to my mind, it's always been stacked against nature. So it's always been stacked in terms of the business arguments. You've got people who are saying, oh, well, you know, the emotional argument is this shouldn't be destroyed. The business argument is it clearly should be destroyed because it's creating jobs and all sorts of things. So for me, for the first time, we've got a set of tools with these reports and with Dasgupta to be able to say, look, some sites where these things are crazy. I mean, the person was talking to me about a site. It's not around here. It's a site which is basically, it's a moss, it's a peat moss site, and so the impact of building on that would be very, very destructive. So if you take all these tools together, I believe we can make better decisions. Now, if people come at this and say, because in the UK, a lot of these sites, people know the sites. They've known the sites for 20 years, what they want to build on. And if they'd been built on 15 years ago, no one would have had any questions. But now we've got a different situation. And I think it's really important that people approach this thing with an open mind to say, look, we've got this site here. Is this now a problem? Is there in fact a better site, a much better site, for doing something similar than the one we're looking at here because of the environmental reasons, because of the cost, and because of the need to pay environmental compensation for what we're doing? I think it's really important. But Donna, you're in a much stronger position here in terms of working the real environment in the local authority. What do you see? How do you see this? Do you see Dasgupta and the plans on the what's been signed up to on nature? Do you see this making a big difference in terms of what happens locally?
Well, I'm one of 343 local authorities in England. So, we're a small fry. But we're taking it very seriously. And, as it's been pointed out, our target to net zero is not soon enough. So we need to involve businesses. We need to involve far more than we have to date in order to accelerate it. But the wonderful thing about sustainability is that you can now pull in a lot more bodies to make bigger changes, and when you've got the energy to do that, and you can you don't care, because I'm 58 and I don't really want to be an MP or anything. I just want to help save the environment. I can say it like it is. So yeah, we are making lots of changes, and we are involving planning, and we are involving farmers and schools, and certainly within our local authority, we're absolutely making a difference. We're putting a biodiversity action plan together, and we're setting our targets much higher than we anticipated being able to do that.
Donna, you're making a huge difference. I just, in the interest of time, because we're going to be over at Clubhouse, I'd like, because of how many of us are on here, we finish at 7. What I'd like to know from each panelist, just wrap it up in 30 seconds. Hope is very important for mankind and to make us happy. Frustration makes us mad and maybe isn't so positive. I'd like from each of the speakers one thing that you hope for and one thing that frustrates you. So should we go? Donna, you just spoke. How about you tell us what frustrates you, what do you hope for, and then you get to choose who speaks next. How about that?
Okay, so I want increased collaboration so that we can share what we know, and I don't want fighting amongst politicians. And I want to hear from Mark next.
Well, thank you. My primary frustration is that we could be doing so much better if we acted collaboratively and took advantage of all the knowledge that already exists out there, which is what we're trying to build into the climate web, as you can see in this slide. And again, we're in the best position that we've ever been in to do some of this, but we are still so siloed and so focused on individual conversations that very few people are trying to figure out the big picture, and I think that's going to be really critical.
I love the energy. We've built up such passion between us. Who do you pick next, Mark?
I'm sorry. Lushini.
I'm hopeful that, off the back that we've had this conversation, I'm hopeful that there is change to come, and I'm going to say this again, we are the generation we have been waiting for. We have the tools to make the change. You know, listening to these conversations, I love the fact that we're in a room with so many of these people. And you know what, actually thank you to the people in the group chat, because it's great to bring out a conversation like this. And I love I will definitely take the link on board. I think my point might have been missed slightly. But yeah, I love learning from what has been said, and I'm really excited to learn more as well. One thing I'm frustrated with is the idea of collaboration. I think sometimes with climate change, we're often at loggerheads with one another discussing problems that don't need to, be fought over. So I'm excited for increased collaboration, as I think everyone has said on this panel. And I'm going to pass to Maddie next.
My biggest hope is that we'll create an environment where people feel like they know what the best environmentally friendly choices are, and where there isn't kind of this difficulty with understanding what you're supposed to do, because I feel like a lot of people do have really good intentions, but they struggle understanding how to put them into practice. And then I'd probably say, my biggest frustration, I think most people have said it again, that we need an understanding that this is an issue that we all face, and this matters to absolutely everybody, no matter your age. So I think it's just that we really need to get a united front to really think of the best way to tackle climate change.
One person, Mariam. Do you want to hand over, Mandy?
Yeah, I'll hand over to Mariam.
I mean, I'm not part of this panel.
Hey, what? we love a maverick.
But I think like there's, I just hope that everyone takes on board what we've said. I'm speaking generally, by the way. I hope everyone takes on board what we've said and these ideas that we've discussed, and actually, continue this conversation. I think it's so important. If we continue this conversation, it just brings this topic forward into people's eyes. It brings it to your families. It brings it to your school. And I think that's how we actually start these movements. And I hope that these movements continue and flow onwards. I think that's the main thing.
I felt a lot of collaboration in this room. This is a safe space for us to discuss. Please share, like, comment, and I think I hope you all join me in thanking Charles. His energy, the amount of energy and effort that it takes to put this together, it's not an easy undertaking. So Charles, thank you very, very much for bringing this to the table. And really, the last couple of minutes should be to you to just wrap up. How about that?
Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us, because the panel only works if we have all you folks as well. So my hope would be is really this point around communication led by the government. I feel that for me, it's going to make it a lot easier. It's going to make these conversations so much easier if the government has put its weight behind really setting the intention, really setting that direction. I mean, if you read the stuff it has done, but in the popular way it's presented, the government seems to be saying, we're putting up wind turbines, right? So that's what the plan is. But they don't say, well, why they're putting up a couple of wind turbines, what the threat is, what they're really trying to do. So for that communication is critically important. And like my frustration, like a number of us here, I think we're all hitting on the same thing. My frustration is really the point about collective action, that we have to take action collectively, not only just in the UK, but in Western Europe and across the whole world, so that we are dependent on collective action. We're dependent on what people do in India, Russia, Saudi Arabia, China, as well as here. And that's the importance of what Joe Biden and John Kerry are doing. A week today, 22nd and 23rd of April, where they meet the biggest world leaders in terms of what might be possible for the rest of this year. So, and just to remind everybody that if you aren't sure what to do, if you found this a little bit confusing, then the point that was made earlier by Lashini, talk to other people about it. Talk to others, talk to people you know, talk to people who know about climate change, who don't know about climate change. But I'm not sure, Don, have you had your say? But I would like just to ask you, as a result of this, do you think you might be able to move 2050 a little bit earlier for Windsor and Maidenhead?
Yes, possibly.
Possibly, okay. All right, so that's okay for now. But what would you like to say on the hope and frustration, Donna?
I've said it already. I did a lot of much more collaboration, and it's Earth Day next Thursday, so we need to be celebrating that. I'm not getting frustrated, Charles. I'm in this to win it. We've got the bit between the teeth.
Well,
And we're all going to win.
Earth Day is a real day for collaboration. I signed up to an event.
Since 1970, all 10% of Americans were out there.
It's quite unbelievable, that, isn't it? But
It's taken us a long time to get there.
If everybody would like to join in and do something on Earth Day, to join in, be collaborative, be sharing with these sort of ideas, I think that would really help. And if you would like to do something now, then do plant some trees. So back over to you, Gary.
Yeah, well, look, I hope that you leave in your diary the next 15th. We'll be here. We'll be consistent. Please come along. Please bring a friend, and I have a safe evening. And I look forward to. You built a community. I'm gonna miss your faces to the next month. So over and out. See you over at Clubhouse.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Oh, Clubhouse is at 7:30, by the way.
That's right.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.